Hi, I'm Elaine Brewster. Welcome to Aspects of Energy, a forum where we talk about ways we can raise our energy. As you know, most of these programs have to do with something that my husband did in his cancer journey. And one of the things we used was hospice. I know you probably all know about hospice. I think it's wonderful. Hospice was around by the time that my mother and my father both needed it, and they both used it and loved it. And we had a neighbor whose name is Verna Nelson, and she was a hospice nurse. And she invited us to have her come anytime we needed a hospice nurse, even in the middle of the night, because the hospice nurse with the company that we were with was 40 miles away. And, and Verna knew that when someone needs something, they need it now. And I'll tell you, we took her up on it a couple of times. And even at 11 o'clock at night, she came dressed in her whites because she said, people, what's your word, Verna, understand me. They feel more calm, that someone professional is there. So Verna, I would love you to tell us how you got into nursing, because I know it wasn't hospice initially, what kind of nursing you did, what drew you to that, and then how you've ended up being in hospice and maybe some of your experiences.
Okay. So I came to BYU to study nursing, and I graduated in the class of 1958, which seems like just yesterday. I'm still very close friends with most of my classmates, many of whom I lost 4 of my nursing classmates during COVID last year, but we were very close. And so we were the third class of BYU. They had just started the College of Nursing, and I loved my mother. My mother was a nurse. I loved studying nursing, being a nurse. And I worked for a while in public health in California. I was a public health nurse in Santa Barbara County, which was very interesting and fun. I did IV nursing at LDS Hospital. But when I met my husband while I was a senior and married. And so when our family started, I actually worked until we had our second child, and he actually had severe brain damage. Our second little boy was born in California, and I became a full-time 24/7 nurse at home, taking care of that child. And that's another whole story. But I will tell you that after I became a hospice nurse and realized that if someone had told me about hospice, I could have held him in my arms when he died instead of having to go somewhere else. I kept him alive much, much, much longer than he needed to be here on earth, because I was a nurse and I knew how to take care of somebody that was sick. So anyway, I regretted that I didn't know about hospice, because it makes it possible for people to die surrounded by their loved ones in a home surrounding, instead of having to go somewhere away from those who love them to be able to die. After our children were all raised, and we had moved to Provo by then. We raised our family in Salt Lake, and I did as many nursing things as I could, like PTA, health person, and kept in touch with a lot of things. But I went back and took some semesters of nursing while I was in Salt Lake before we moved to Provo. And I just happened to be, and I worked, so to go back into nursing, after when my husband needed to retire because his health was failing, I decided to go back so I could get health insurance. And my first job going back was working for the blood bank. So every experience I had along the way prepared me for being able to be a hospice nurse, being a public health nurse and being a visiting teacher, going into people's homes to reassure and to help really prepared me for hospice. So how did I get into hospice? It's a funny story. I actually taught in the nursing labs at BYU, which helped get me back my skills teaching how to do catheterizations and all the basic things that people need, really helped me to be prepared also. But I was looking in the newspaper, trying to find jobs for our college students that were still living at home. That was why we moved to Provo, because we had 3 college students when we moved here. And I was looking for a job for my children, and I saw this ad for hospice. And so I answered the ad, and they hired me immediately, because this person who had started her own hospice, a wonderful nurse named Kit Jackson, started hospice for Utah. And at the time, the hospice companies that they had here were the large international companies that somebody had started. And she had a whole different perspective about hospice nursing. She had taken a course in it in California and was very experienced. And she lived in Salt Lake City, but she was running, especially in Utah County. She got acquainted with the doctors in Utah County, and they would give her referrals. And so my first patients that she assigned me to were these 2 wonderful 95 and 97-year-old women who were both from Springville. One lived in her home that she had been born in Springville, and the other one was in a assisted, what do they call it? What do they call those? Where they put seniors, assisted living here. And so I decided that the water in Springville must be really, really special, because these people had been very healthy until they got into their 90s. And what Kit taught me was we didn't have a lot of patients. And so she said, I want you to go and listen. I just want you to go and listen to your patients and give them the opportunity to talk about their lives and end their lives in a way that they feel honored for what they've done. And I loved that. It was really sweet. As hospice has progressed to now, they have many, many hospice companies, many nurses that are pressured and working very hard. They don't take that time. They don't have that time to take to just get to love the person and get what she wanted me to do was have those people trust me. And that's how I gained their trust, was by spending time with them and listening to them. And I learned that it's really important that the families be included in this process. And so I really loved hospice. I did it for 15 years. And what I really, this sounds strange, but what I loved the most was being the up in the night nurse. I found that other nurses who had families, had young children, really needed to just work in the daytime and not have to have their patients call them at night. And so I started being the on-call nurse at night and weekends. And so I usually was the one that got called at 4 a.m. or midnight, whatever. I don't know how long you want me to go on, but I'll tell you one of my favorite nights. I had 3 deaths in one night. And Elaine, I may have looked really professional when I came to your house, but I usually put on scrubs over the top of my pajamas. And I had 3 deaths in the middle of in one night, from probably midnight to 6 a.m. And one of them was in Pleasant Grove. I can still picture these houses. I don't remember the names of the people, but I picture the families, the people, the circumstances. I could tell you what color my pajamas were. So anyway, my job, besides being with the family would call if they saw that I would teach what to watch for, and they would call me, and it was my responsibility to prepare the person after they died for the mortuary to come and for the mortuary to come. So I even, and so my husband used to tease me that the morticians, when I went to funerals, were like my friends. And I would always say, I hope you don't recognize me. I don't look like I did in the middle of the night. But so by the time I got to the third one, I finally looked in the mirror and my pajamas were showing through my scrubs. I hadn't hidden my pajamas very well. I didn't look very good. I'd been up all night long, but I will never forget the night that 3 different people died. But every person deserves to have the very best experience when they leave this life. I called myself the midwife for end of life. And that was really, really the responsibility that I took to prepare for people for the death of a loved one, to be there when they needed the support they needed, and especially to be able to make those last moments something that wasn't suffering. After you ask me some questions, I would like to explain my definition of suffering.
You can go ahead and do that.
Okay.
My question for right now is, in dealing with such an emotionally tender time, how did you handle that?
Well, I'd been through a lot of emotional things myself. We had a team. The hospice is always a team, so I wasn't ever alone. Once a week we met in our team meetings and talked about the patients in their progress as we had them. And I do want to explain to you what the qualifications are for a person to be on hospice, but there was always a doctor on our team, and a social worker, people that were they're a chaplain. And these are required. Every hospice team is required to have these certain people on their team. And so it was a team effort. It wasn't something I did alone. And that was really where I gained a lot of my emotional support. I will tell you, my husband wasn't very good emotional support. He would joke and say, well, my wife says in the middle of the night, is he dead? And he'd say, I would pinch myself to see if she was talking about me. Anyway, my family made some pretty funny jokes about the things I did and the things I said, and I learned that you have to have a sense of humor when you're working in a situation like that, and so telling the interesting, we never made fun of our patients. I don't mean that, but I had a time when I was pulling away from an assisted living place in Payson in the middle of the night, and I was a scaredy cat growing up, and I was always afraid of the dark. So for me to be out running around in the middle of the night was really I was told, you just have to do this by prayer in the spirit. And it takes a lot of, it's a spirit, it's the most spiritual kind of job a person could ever have. So back to the sense of humor. I quickly, you have to gather the supplies that are left and things. And I opened my trunk, put them in the trunk, jumped in my car, started my car, and my horn started to blow. And I went off down the street with the mortician following me, and my horn honking halfway out of Payson before I finally stopped and got it stopped. But I had those kind of things in the middle of the night, and I have a lot of great memories. What did I say I wanted to tell?
Suffering.
Suffering.
Your definition.
Okay, I learned, this person that taught me how to do hospice is really, she left Utah because she wasn't a member of the church, and she felt that she was not really welcome. She felt that she wasn't comfortable with how people treated her. I think it was her own perception, but she was really a wonderful teacher, and she told us that the Attorney General had said that no one should ever suffer with cancer. No one, and cancer patients were really my specialty and my love. And I will tell you that hospice was started in the early 1800s in England for the purpose of people who had cancer not to have to spend the rest of their life in a hospital, because when you have cancer, it isn't something that they can treat and get you well and get you out of the hospital. So people would have to spend months and months in the hospital when they had that diagnosis and there wasn't treatment. And so that was how hospice was originated. And it was especially helpful for people with cancer that there was no longer a treatment that would, and a lot of times treatment of cancer will make a person sicker than just letting cancer take its course. So there are cancer specialists. There's a wonderful cancer specialist here in Provo, Nathan Rich, who when he first started, he would say to people, I can make you quite sick treating your cancer, but you have an alternative. And he would let me go, he would call me and have me go talk to his patients to see if that's what they wanted. Now that they have better and more advanced treatments, the cancer specialists don't do that like they did, but this was like 20 years ago. So suffering, there are two definitions of the word suffer. If you think of the scripture, suffer the children to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. And by the way, that's the scripture on my little boy's tombstone. So suffer in that means to allow. So allowing the process of getting out of this world to take place, that kind of suffering is what hospice is about. It's not doing any advanced treatment, not trying to keep a person here a while longer when they really feel like that is their appointed time. So that's something I learned as a hospice nurse, that allowing nature to take its course can sometimes make the end of life so much more beautiful than for a person to spend their last months or days in a hospital setting. Excuse me, I'm also the mission nurse. I'll just,
you need to get that.
I'll send a message, I'll call them back. Okay. All right.
That's a nice ringtone.
Oops, I can't hear you.
Just okay, just froze.
I've always had to have a nice ring because it would ring in the night. So I've had a cell phone since, it must be important. You go ahead and talk to each other.
We'll keep talking because you ladies can unmute if you'd like to. You know, one of the things that Verna just has so many insights from her 15 years of being a hospice nurse. And one time, Verna, you told me that when people are really, really ill or terminally ill, that they don't like to go to sleep at night because unconsciously, subconsciously, they're afraid that they'll never wake up.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and that was really interesting to know from her, because that's sure what happened, you know, with my husband and some of you who've been caretakers also. You know, you're working all day long, doing alternative work. We were juicing, we were doing wheatgrass juicing plants. I was still calling people to try and find more oxygen and ozone and all this stuff. And so I was working all day long, plus, you know, working with him. So when 10 o'clock at night comes, man, I was ready for bed and he was not ready to let me go. Mm-hmm. And it was really hard. In my situation, my ecclesiastical leader is called a bishop of our area around here. And he saw how wearing it was on me. Of course, I said, I'm fine. Well, I wasn't, but that's what you say, right? and he organized the neighbor men to come. He said, we'll have one come every night. And I said, oh, if you'll just have them come every other night so I can get sleep every other night. And that made the world of difference, because then finally I could get sleep again.
Well, that's very true, Elaine. You ask anybody how they want to die, and we sometimes talked about this in our hospice team meetings. Our leader would say, how do you want to die? And so that way she would find out what we were seeing, who was having the easiest time of it, you know. But you ask anybody, they'll say, oh, I just want to go to sleep. We learned that when we were children. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. That's kind of the first, that's the written prayer that at least I learned when I was a little girl. So they say that, but then when especially a person in their 90s that's lived that long, our 90-year-olds are the ones that have the hardest time dying, because they are so their health has been so good that they think they're never going to die, or they want to make it to 100 or whatever, and so they don't want to fall asleep because they are afraid they might not wake up. It's not everyone, but there are an awful lot of people that don't sleep well, including the caregivers. A lot of poor sleepers out there, and I'm one of them. I thought I might as well be working in the middle of the night. When I took care of my little Todd that died, I could count on one hand how many nights he slept through the night. Maybe he was afraid to leave too, but I got in the habit of not sleeping. I never could sleep at night because he did not want to sleep at night. He didn't want to be alone. So I learned from that you might as well be busy doing something. You might as well help somebody in the night if you're not sleeping. So.
Most of the people on this call today are nurses or teachers.
Oh.
And so I think that they are, you know.
Maybe they know. So I just had lunch with my cute little widows lady, neighborhood widows group. And I'm the youngest. Well, there's one that's 80, but most of them are in their 90s. And I told them what I was going to do. And so one of them said, well, how do you get on hospice? And that's a really good question. Most people do not know how to access hospice. And it's easiest for those who have regular doctor's visits and their doctor knows them. Those are the ones that it's easy for the caregiver to call and tell what's happening. I did this with my husband. His doctor was very well aware of where he was with his health. And I just called and said, it's time for my husband to have hospice. And he ordered it. And I had the hospice people over that quickly. It helps if you've got friends that know how to do that. So you have to have a doctor's order. In fact, hospice is a Medicare program, and it's every hospice company, and there are way too many of them, every hospice company has the same regulations. Some of them tweak it a little and make it a little different because it's competitive, which is very unfortunate. But the requirement of Medicare for hospice is that you have 2 doctors attest that you have a person has. I'm not talking about you. This person has 6 months to a year to live, and it really is based upon an major organ failure. I also did the admissions for most of the hospice patients for the companies that I worked for, because it fit well with my being the night and weekend nurse. And so qualifying, I have this term I've always used with my children, and it works with hospice too. It's not a have to, it's a get to. It's something you get to have if you qualify for it. And so qualifying requires that a person has had usually been in and out of the emergency room if they've had to go to the emergency room for several for causes more than once. That's a qualifier. And so it's liver failure, heart. Everybody dies from heart failure, and that's so that's a little harder to get on so it's the ejection fraction of a person's heart that a cardiologist has to report. That's one of the qualifiers if it's for heart. So brain, lungs, heart, liver, kidneys. Kidney failure is one of the easiest because most people that access hospice with kidney failure have been on dialysis. So if they've been on dialysis or qualify for dialysis and choose not to continue, then those markers will qualify them for hospice. So do you have any questions about how qualifying for hospice?
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. So if the person knows, so I get a lot of, whenever my neighbors ask me, what do you think? What should I do? I will tell them how to have the doctor. And I have my favorite hospice nurses that are still working. And so I usually will tell them the name of that company and tell them if the doctor wants to refer them to that company, this is their fax number. And so then the doctor has to send the doctor has to send to a hospice company the referral, has to send something saying that he's referring them, and then also having the chart, the notes on what recently has been the history. I should say the history of the patient is what the hospice company needs. And then a nurse goes out and sometimes, quite often, they'll send a social worker along. That the social worker helps to do the admission process. But the nurse's evaluation then also is a part of the admission process. To get it qualified. But that doctor's order is really crucial. And there are people who are in their 90s that haven't been to a doctor maybe their whole life, and it's really hard to get hospice for those people because they don't have someone that can say, yeah, this is what's happening.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
In Utah especially, we're known for our very healthy 90-year-olds.
Well, yeah, my dad was 89 when he died. And he'd never been to a hospital, ever.
Yep,
so
wonderful.
I didn't know that. And I did not know that hospice was under Medicare.
Oh, it is a Medicare program because it doesn't cost. It does not cost a person. You can die for free. It's too bad people don't know that. It is probably one of the least known government programs. So there are two programs that are so wonderful that Medicare funds. One is home care. The other is hospice. Well, if a person is if they have a fall, and need to have help at home, then that requires rehabilitation. And so home care is usually what the doctor will order, because a physical therapist can come to the home if they have. So most people that qualify for home care qualify under physical therapy, because home care is for the purpose of rehabilitation. So that it's like a fork in the road when a person decides that, if they have home care already, then a nurse can evaluate and say, we're there to a point where you qualify now to have hospice because you're not getting better, you're not rehabilitating. So as soon as somebody rehabilitates, they have 100 days after they've been in a hospital to have rehabilitation. Most people will go to a rehab center, but they can go home. If they have a caregiver at home, they can go home and have home care with wonderful ability to just be home. And if they begin to get to where they are no longer homebound, then they'll take them off of home care. But if they become more homebound, like bedfast, or the caregiver can't manage them, then they can look at hospice and see if they can have more care. And usually with hospice, they don't send a physical therapist. But if it's for the benefit of the caregiver to be able to manage the person, sometimes once in a while they will have a physical therapist. But physical therapy primarily is attached to home care.
Okay.
So, and most people are familiar with home care, and it's usually so what the hospice company does, they access the Medicare insurance. That's how hospice is funded, is they use the Medicare money that pays for their insurance. So it's a lucrative business, and that for hospice and home care companies. That's why there are many of them.
Oh.
And many doctors are not only the director, the medical director, they're the owner of the hospice. Yeah.
Well, and besides, all these baby boomers are getting older, and and so we just have more people that that are needing the care.
Mm-hmm. It's getting harder and harder for a person to qualify for hospice than it was when I first started. It was, and it's partly because Medicare cannot afford to pay to do a custodial care. So custodial care is when a person is just on a plateau. They're not getting better, they're not getting worse. And that's what does a caregiver in. I've seen caregivers die before their loved one they're caring for, because it is extreme. And Elaine painted you a realistic picture. It is so difficult for the caregiver. And that's why they need home care or hospice or family to give all the support they can. I don't know if you remember the weeds that were our neighbors, Elaine. We were trying to get hospice for him. She was on hospice. I'm not sure the details because I was there for her, and all of a sudden I got a call and heard the fire sirens, and her husband died trying to get her off the toilet, just dropped over dead. And the grandson that was there didn't know about hospice. Instead of calling me, he called 911. And actually, I was in the house when the police came, and they wouldn't let anybody else in the house. It's a suspected death. If someone dies, it's not on hospice. And there had to be investigation. I had to go through a police investigation because I was in the house when that man died and he wasn't on hospice. And
wow.
so hospice does that wonderful thing for people as well. A death does not have to be investigated, or doesn't have to have an, what do they call it? Not an autopsy, but the legal person. You don't have to have legal investigation or involvement in any way if the person is already on hospice.
That's interesting too.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have any questions that you want? I suspect that everybody has dealt with it probably more than I have.
Yes, I have a question. Verna, your information and your care is so wonderful to hear about. Thank you so much, and helpful as well. I think you mentioned that there were two definitions for suffer or suffering, and you mentioned the one to allow. Mm-hmm. And was there another one that?
Well, the other is the one that we don't even like to talk about, that we don't like to watch, and it's when a person is just miserable. I would say misery is the other definition of suffering. Watching someone die without the attention of a professional, perhaps. When a person dies without hospice, and a lot of people think that they can do it themselves, they don't want someone. And when they talk about that, I think, you're thinking that your loved one's just going to fall asleep and not wake up. But quite often at the end of life, when and this happens particularly in people that have been very healthy, as their body begins to shut down, and they if they don't have oxygen, they begin to struggle as they breathe. And our goal is always to not, I would say it helps a person not to taste of death if they have someone who's there that professionally knows how to administer medications that can be calming and help. And I'm not saying that everyone needs this, but I will tell you, little drops of morphine are not the same as a morphine injection of 5 milligrams of morphine. A drop of morphine is half a milligram, as opposed to 5 milligrams that they might give someone in the hospital in the emergency room that they're allergic to. No, you know, it's been a while. I could be wrong. It could be that 5 milligrams is the little tiny bit. I'm sorry, I don't remember my doses anymore. I've been retired for quite a while, and dosage of medications are one of the things that have left me. I promise I'll never go back to giving medication. But 0.5 milligrams of lorazepam or Ativan, I call peace drops. And if a person is in any way not able to handle what's happening, if they need to be calmed, if there is anxiety, just that tiny little and we would give the drops under their tongue. So there's usually an emergency kit that's given to the family to have on hand. So if they call the nurse in the middle of the night and she's not able to get right there, they're not as good about it as we used to be, but I always instructed exactly how to use the emergency kit when I first delivered it. And using these drops under the tongue, because usually by the time a person is dying, they can't take a pill of any kind. There's not much you can do in the way of medication. So there's a way to administer those drops. I saw a patient that we were called to start hospice, and she was in the act of dying. We call it actively dying. And she was struggling, just struggling. And when I walked in the room and gave her some drops of morphine, instead of dying that hour, she didn't die till the next day, but she was comfortable. So it isn't that hospice nurses assist in death at all. I would say we more help the process of dying to be comfortable and pleasant, rather than to see your loved one suffering.
Well, I know that one night that you came over, my son is the one who was staying overnight with Scott. And it was 11 o'clock at night, and it took you 2 hours. And Ben and I just both sat there and watched. And you just said, we need to do it a little bit at a time, you know, until he gets to that comfortable place.
Mm-hmm. Now, knowing how to use the medications that are I really always felt bad when I heard someone say that you give morphine until they die. That is not the case at all. You're giving these medications until they're comfortable. A person cannot die when they're struggling and miserable and suffering. They have to be comfortable. And so bringing comfort allows the natural process to take place without having a loved one having to watch that.
Wow. Thank you.
Well, thank you for letting me remember what a great time of my life that was. It was the most spiritual experience I ever had as a nurse. Yeah.
Can I just make a comment? When you just mentioned a spiritual event, it really is. I remember working in a nursing care home, and I didn't know this particular patient, and we were in there in his room, just kind of making him comfortable, changing his bed, and when he took that last breath, as I say, I didn't know him, and I hadn't really worked with him. The nurses' aide were working more closely with him. When he took that last breath out, my mouth dropped open, because the light that came into the room, I mean, it's an impact, you know, on me. And all of a sudden there's this light. Normally you can almost see the soul or the life just going. And I mean, and I'm, you're when you don't know the person and you're just happen to be helping the nurses assistants to make them comfortable. This was really awesome. That spirit of just drifting off and literally seeing that room light up. Mm-hmm. So very emotional.
Right. And quite often people cannot, a person is not able to die when their loved ones is standing right at their bedside.
Yeah,
it's very difficult because they're that tug and pull of being not wanting to have that departure. I would just tell you about my husband's cousin who had ALS. She and her husband had been on a mission when she realized she had something and came home, and it took a year or two before she actually was near death. And I can't remember. I don't know if I was still a hospice nurse then or not, but I spent a lot of time with them. And my husband and I went to visit them on Christmas Eve, and we knew that she was getting close, but I never rang the doorbell when I went to people's houses. They knew I was coming and I would just go in. But for some reason, I rang the doorbell because my husband was with me. And so he had to come and answer the door. He had been at her bedside. And in just that minute that he came to let us in, we went back into the room. And he had said that she was holding her hands up. He knew that she was close and had been in communication with her loved ones on the other side. And here she had ALS. You cannot lift your hands. You cannot, you're really incapacitated, but she actually was looking to embrace her loved one. So just the minute that he left her bedside, when we walked back into the room, her spirit had left.
Yeah, it's like giving permission. Okay, he's not here. I've got permission now. I can just go.
Yeah.
Well, and there are some people, I think, that want to die when people are around. Some of us on the call know Kathleen Duell, whose husband had prostate cancer, and she very, very much wanted him to die with her being there. And she had left, I think he was in the hospital at the time, but she had left the room. And then later when she came back, then he was gone. And at first she was rather distraught over that, but then she realized that he had probably done that for her benefit, that he didn't want her there when he moved on, and that's what she felt, is that he was doing it for her benefit.
Very tender time. Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much. And
before we go,
yeah, go ahead, Hattie Jane.
I've been, my nursing world, I was down here in DC and this area of the States. And at the time, we didn't have hospice. Hospice didn't exist. Canada probably got to it better than we did. But at that time, there were no dying patients at NIH, even though that was a major research area of very, very sick people. But nobody was allowed to die at NIH. They weren't there to die. And we had a number of people who felt that they were not going to make it through the treatment. They were not going to do it, that they were struggling. And they wanted to talk. They wanted someone to acknowledge the struggle and where they were at. And it was during the time of Kubler-Ross and her study on death and dying. And with that affect, the people started to marshal and to bring it to the attention that this was a state of life that needed to be respected and needed a development of a way of creating a process that would be supportive of whatever the people needed and wanted. And then slowly it came about that we finally were able to establish hospice. And another thing, it was a mistaken idea that once you're in hospice, you have to die in order to leave hospice. And that's not true. That it's not absolutely common, but there have been many people who have recovered and have left hospice. Sometimes they even left for a period of time to come back and then left again. So it's like we think of hospice of being the last resort, and there's a leading to there's a death, and it's not always that way. But the support and the care and the okay, here I go. The ability to be heard, the ability to be authentic, is something in which now you're allowed, because otherwise it was also during the time when you weren't able to tell a person their blood pressure, because that was for the doctor. That was a time, don't tell them, because that they're in the process of a very severe near-death situation, because no, that's too much suffering. You can't tell them that. So there was a lot of dishonesty and a lot of fakery in expressions and relationships, and it wasn't healthy. And so that's where my awareness of where hospice came in.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Aren't we fortunate that we have, this wonderful thing that, that didn't exist 40, 50 years ago, and that now it's offered to people, and we know more about it, and how to have our 90-year-old aunt who never went to the doctor, and have her somehow be able to be part of hospice. Well, thank you all. And when I get this on YouTube, I'd love you to send it to any of your friends who are nurses and home caregivers, because they would really love to hear this. Thank you so much, Verna, and thank you, all of you. Have a rest of a good weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.